Well, and today I am reading the chart of the actual podcast.
Well, in celebration of our third birthday for this podcast, I reached out to Andy and I said, could you read the chart for the podcast? He was like, absolutely. Give me when you released it, where it was released from. Like I had to give my zip code and the time and all of that good stuff. And who knew a podcast could have a birth chart?
Well, and that's a great point, actually, because one thing I want to tell people that many may not realize is that everything has a birth chart. So not just people, but also companies, countries. It's why, you can read the chart of the United States or any country and kind of have an idea of what's coming up. But with companies, it is important because in astrology, the main belief is that the time and day that something begins kind of imprints a certain energy, much like with the birth chart. So this is why one of the services that I offer on my website is that if, let's say that you are trying to launch your own business or you're thinking about when should I open my bakery or whatever it might be, I can help you identify a handful of dates that are better than others. Because there are some things that if they are in a birth chart of a company or something that you're trying to launch, it does point to a higher probability of more obstacles, more frustration, success being harder. So that's where it can help to have the right dates.
Are you smoothing us, precursoring us into girls?
You really should have met me before you started this.
No, it's actually amazing because the chart of the podcast has minimal. I mean, I'll talk about what are the challenges, but it's a very good chart.
Does anybody come to you when they're planning their wedding date? This just popped up as you were talking about like business launching, and ask about certain dates and then make a decision on when they get married based off of that?
Yes, and the thing is that I always say for wedding charts, in my opinion, it's more about the actual ceremony and how the day will go, because you're not beginning your relationship with that person when you get married. So, some astrologers make it seem like, oh, if the astrology of your wedding isn't the best in your relationship, I'm like, no, but you met this person 3 years ago. So it's not. But one of my pet peeves, though, is when people tell me, oh, I'm getting married in 2 months. Is that a good day? And I'm like, well, right, it's too late. Even if I tell you it sucks, what are you going to do? Like cancel and, So it's like, right. Don't ask me if you already made a decision. Because then I'm put in that very awkward spot that if I happen to look at the chart and it's not so good, I don't want to, be Debbie Downer. So that's how.
Do you also find as an astrologer that, like, if you were a doctor and, like, people are always like, can you take a look at this and tell me if this looks normal? Do you find that people in your life hound you often for advice on decisions they should be making or what they're doing because you have such a vast knowledge?
Well, what I'll say is that over the year, yes, in the past, and that helped me to develop very strong boundaries with people. And this is more acquaintances, not good friends, but there was a time when I tell people, yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. You can go on my website, book a reading, and we'll totally talk. Because I think some people forget. Yeah, well, some people forget that, this is something that I've been learning for over 20 years, that it takes time.
It's a skill set.
Well, and I'm sure that Amanda, you probably have had it happen maybe with like people asking you for advice on working out, right?
Yeah.
Listen, I just got to athleticism, and she happens to be in my orbit. Okay, she said the door was open.
Information.
Okay?
Yes.
So,
but sometimes I think it's people. Sometimes not too often, but sometimes people on Instagram. In fact, 2 weeks ago, somebody started following me, and within minutes sent me a direct message sending me a photo of their chart and their boyfriend's chart and said, hey, can you look at this and tell me if we're compatible and what the challenges are? And I said, yeah, I do relationship readings. Here's a link to my website. And if you want to book, that's where you can. I mean, that to me was a little bit over the top.
Yeah. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
you're going to need a person to handle just your inbox. You know what I mean? So you could just go in there and get to swiping.
most people are very respectful.
So what have you been up to?
Well, I've actually met several of your listeners over the past year who, as a result of me being on the show, have come to me for reading. So that's been fantastic.
I love that.
I do too.
Yeah. And last month or a few weeks ago, I launched my first online astrology class.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
It's titled How to Read a Birth Chart, because basically a lot of people who come to me for readings were saying, well, I know the basics, but I want to know how to put it all together. So it's not Astrology 101. It's not like if you've never even heard about any of this, it's going to be a little bit advanced. But if you're somebody who maybe has read about astrology for several years, you've had your birth chart read, but now you're kind of like, but how do I put everything together into doing a reading? That's who the class is for. It's online, you do it at your own speed, but there is, on the website, there is a forum where you can ask me questions and I'll answer them. But it's basically 4 1-hour lessons that make up the whole class.
Oh, wow, that's doable.
Yeah, and also I purposely did it so that, there's no homework, there's no reading, there's nothing of the sort. You just kind of watch the videos, and then you can, apply the knowledge yourself if you want to practice with your family members, your friends, but there's no actual work for the course either. So yeah, it's very, very manageable.
And once you purchase the course, is that something that you have like forever and you can refer back to it and you're always available to?
Yes, once you have it, it's for life. And the course is offered forever. It's not like a limited offering. So, some people were telling me I don't have the money right now. Well, you can sign up in 6 months. There's no rush.
So it's just rolling enrollment.
Yeah, and then in the fall, I'm going to launch a second class about how to predict with astrology, like the forecasting part of astrology.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's my favorite part of my readings, actually. Because you can get the information all you want, but if you can't figure out how to apply it to what's going to happen in the future, and use the information that you're given to then change your overall behavior or attitude, then the point of the reading has been missed. Because I'm going to tell you something, Andy. Everything you told me in my reading in October 2021 manifested itself in October through October of 2022 for that whole calendar year. But there were some things that I was in control of and didn't apply myself. You know what I'm saying? But it was all there and it was all within my reach, and I understood it because of that reading.
Yes. Well, that's why I always say that I'm an astrologer who believes in free will, in the sense that the only thing that comes up in an astrology reading when you predict or forecast is what are the situations that you're going to encounter, but then you decide what you do in that situation. So, it's not like I can predict how you're going to react, but I can at least give you a heads up of what's coming up.
Yeah. And what inspired you to create your courses?
I've always enjoyed teaching. One of the things that I think I do very well is I'm very good at taking complex topics and really distilling them down to the basics so that people who are new to it understand it.
Every time you explain something on your Instagram, I always feel like it is so accessible, and I love astrology, and I just have scraped the surface of the things that I know and understand. And gosh, I see people come into your stories and ask questions, and I'm like, it's like speaking a whole other language. And I think that it can feel overwhelming or a little daunting, but I love the idea because you always do such a beautiful job of making it very easy to understand. And I walk away feeling like, even in that 20-second story, that I've learned so much more about astrology or understanding my chart, just hearing you explain it.
Thank you. Well, and that's it too, that I was also being asked by people, have you ever thought about teaching a class? So I started realizing that, oh, there's interest here and I like to do it. And you can sign up by going to my website, astrologywithandy.com. Up at the top menu, there's an online class link. And the link is also on my Instagram bio.
And then I purchased the course. I get started. How am I learning? Am I reading? Am I watching videos? How are you breaking down this information?
It's all videos. So I recorded myself doing 4 1-hour presentations.
Okay.
And there's 4 topics. And then within each topic, I basically first cover the information, and then I bring up birth charts so you can see how I apply what I just taught you when I'm doing a reading.
Oh, I bet that makes it so much easier, because then you get that real time. Because I feel like sometimes when I've taken a course in the past, like I've done classes on tarot, it makes sense in the moment, but then when it comes to that application and you have questions or something maybe comes up that you didn't cover in your course, and the fact that they can then come in and ask you questions, that's really, really cool.
Yeah, so I thought it was important to, at the end of each lesson, show at least 1 or 2 charts where I'm like, well, here's how I apply what I just taught you. And then I think it is important for people to be able to ask questions, but trying to do live classes gets way too complicated with people's schedules and timing, and so that's why there's a forum where people can ask me questions. And the great thing is that then as a student you can read what other people are asking as well, so it's a public forum, which of course is archived. So if you join the class in 9 months and several people have taken it, you'll also see all their questions and my answers about the course.
Wow, that's cool. I'm so excited for you.
I'm doing things.
Yeah, you are.
Indeed.
All right. Well, should we get into it?
Well, first I want to know, Amanda, what is our actual birthday time and place? I know it's May.
Okay. May 22nd, we released the first episode at midnight, and it came from Cincinnati.
All right, so the Imperfect Strangers podcast is a Gemini baby.
Yep.
And there's quite a lot of Gemini in the chart because you have the Sun, Mercury, and Venus all in Gemini. So right off the bat, that already makes it a very Gemini energy, because in astrology we have 10 celestial bodies. You have the sun and the moon, and then 8 planets. Of those 10, 5 are called personal: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. So you have 3 of the 5 You have Sun, Mercury, and Venus in Gemini. So the personal planets we give a little bit more attention to because they really kind of make up the bulk of who you are, whereas the other planets are more generational planets. So that's a very Gemini energy. Also, the moon is in Taurus, which is interesting because I know that's your sun sign, Amanda.
Yeah.
So the thing about a Gemini sun for a podcast in particular is fantastic because Gemini is the sign of communication. It's a sign of opinions, debates, ideas. It is a sign that rules podcasts and radio shows and magazines and newspapers. So this concept, especially of two people who in some aspects have different views on life and different perspectives and getting to know one another, is that's the epitome of Gemini. It's getting to know people through communication. Yeah.
So smart. We didn't even know it.
I might just lie and be like, actually, we planned the launch of the podcast around the idea that. Wow.
And then what's also interesting here is that, and this is what I was referring to by this chart being very positive. The sun in this chart is 120 degrees away from. So 120 degrees is a special angle called the trine, Trine, and things in trine are getting along with each other and working well together. So you have the sun of the chart trining Jupiter and trining Saturn. So let me break that down. Jupiter is a planet that when it's involved in a trine, it's all about expansion and growth. And I always say when you're starting a business or launching something new, you want good Jupiter aspects because that points to easy growth. If you don't have positive Jupiter aspects, it's easy for things to only reach a certain point and then they start fizzling. Or for example, you do it for 3 months and then the momentum dies down. So I think the Jupiter trine is what has helped you to grow over the years. Your audience has grown, your reach has grown. And then you have the sun trining Saturn, which Saturn is the planet of responsibility and commitment and discipline and sticking things out. So that's also really good for a business chart because if you don't have Saturn, it can be very easy to either, lose track of what's happening or not be as disciplined or not stick to the plan. So you have this really wonderful mix of like expansion, but also in a way that's measured and basically that you guys were, whether you knew it or not, it's enabled you to keep doing this sustainably and consistently over time.
Wow. It's interesting because I believe that when you read our synastry that we also personally between our two signs, we had some interesting trines that made it so that our relationship as friends would be strong. And I have to go back and listen to it now because I can't remember exactly. But that's interesting that we would have that personally together, but then have it happen again for the show.
Yeah, and I think that kind of cements it all, and it's why the show kind of serves like a vehicle or a vessel for all that to come together and work.
Huh, interesting.
That's crazy because in my mind, it was operating in my regular non-Gemini mind. I was operating in, just like, show up for the other person, be responsible, do your due diligence, don't give up. Always just in the background, and we always say this on the show, podcasts don't last past 7 episodes, or whatever the weird, terrible number was. So my thing had always been just make sure we beat that, and every day just beat that. And so the fact that it was born to keep trying is pretty cool, because it hasn't always been easy, and here we are. And
even more so because the rising sign or the ascendant of the podcast is Capricorn, which is the planet that is ruled by Saturn. And Capricorn is that energy of, Capricorn, I always say, is the slow and steady energy that gets to the top of the mountain. That's why Capricorn is represented by the mountain goat, which is not the fastest animal by any means, but it's the one that does get to the peak. You know what I mean?
See what I'm saying? That resonates.
Oh my gosh.
slow and steady. And sometimes it's slower, sometimes it's not that steady. But it's on the tracks, and that's what matters. And you have to know, we will pep talk each other like, no, it's cool. It is what we're going to get there. Like so many times when we think we're falling off, and we're not falling off. We're just regular people who have lives outside of making the show. But like the show in a weird way is still prioritized. And like, I don't know where that comes from because I don't have that discipline with a lot of stuff.
Well, and I would attribute a part of that to, and this is why the fact that the moon is in Taurus is a very big help for this chart, because there's so much Gemini that if you had also the moon in Gemini, it would be a little bit scattered and could easily go in way too many directions and there would be no focus. But the moon in Taurus is what gives the podcast also this backdrop of like stability and groundedness. And I think that with the Capricorn ascendant is like a really good blend to all the Gemini chatter and ideas that needs a framework. And that's what the moon in Taurus provides. Now, another thing that's interesting, and I'm just wondering, so at the bottom of the chart, there's a very sensitive degree that's labeled or called the IC, the letter I and the letter C. And that's considered the base, the foundation of the chart. And if there's any planet very close to it, that planet takes a lot of prominence. And you have the planet Uranus right on, I mean, it's not even next to it, it is right on top of the IC. Now that's interesting because Uranus in astrology is a planet that rules things like lightning and electricity and earthquakes. It's a very unexpected energy. It can be disruptive. It's not a bad energy. But when there's so much Uranus in a chart, which I think there is here because it's so prominent, it talks about this, a lot of the trajectory of the podcast being something that comes at you maybe in waves or unpredictably, or that's something new to you, and that you're kind of getting used to it as you go along. Does that track?
Totally. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think just thinking like most recently, we were talking about like, we were both having this like weird creative block. And I think sometimes we'll come into it and there's not always a lot of like pre-planning of like what we're going to talk about. And recently we had probably like a good, 4 weeks where every time we'd sit down, we were like, and we thought that it was a lot of the outside stuff that was happening for both of us personally, and then that was like kind of blocking that ability to sit down and be creative. But I do feel that over the years we've had these kind of like waves where like we'll be like super hyper focused and like super creative and all of these things are coming, and then there's times where it kind of like pulls back and we're kind of like sitting in this place of like not knowing like directions or what to talk about or where to take things. And so I feel like we've been really feeling our way blindly through this whole process from the start.
And I would say that with Uranus at the base of the chart, it means that actually is the key to this working. If you were to, I'm not saying you would ever do this necessarily, but if you were to say, you know what, starting from now on, we should always have like all the topics in an agenda and we have to think about them ahead of time, that would actually not work with this chart. So all this on the flyness is actually good. But you still have the discipline of no matter what, we're going to show up week after week. But this whole thing of kind of improvising or like when we get there, we'll decide what to do. That's at the heart of this chart and it's why it works.
Okay, that's good to know because and we talked about this on a recent episode, when we're trying to take an appropriate amount of what's going on in our real lives and share it as we see fit. Sometimes after the end result and we go back and we listen to it, it feels like, okay, this feels oversharey on my part, or are you sure you want it? Are you ready to share that piece of yourself there? Because what people have to understand is while we do know each other and we have created a friendship, we are also still figuring out what are you willing to share online. And sometimes we'll think it's good to go. We'll hang up the phone and then we'll get to the editing process and one or the other will say, ooh, I don't know if I could say that just yet, or I'm not ready to say that. Can we take that piece out? But then we still keep it, but we work around it. But the reason why we keep it and work around it is because the whole premise of the show is to be getting to know each other, and that's a piece that we just got to know. So, and we have tried before, like, let's put some topics in a thing so that when we get into these weird ruts, which are like it's like the writer's block for a podcast. So when we get into these ruts, we could do that. But then we find that we'll go and we'll have a thing and we'll say what the topic is supposed to be. We'll get it, we'll do it, and then we'll listen back and we'll go, that didn't feel like us though. And we've had this multiple times, and we really just thought it was whatever podcaster's block is.
And in this chart, it's because at the heart of this chart, in order for it to work, it's all about, it's interesting because I think the Saturn, the Capricorn, the Taurus comes from, we're not going to give up on this, we're going to keep going. But so that's where the grounded discipline comes from. But the Gemini energy, that's very in the moment, and this Uranus energy is saying that's what makes this, that's the heart of this podcast. So too much planning is gonna actually play against you.
Well, and that makes me feel really good because at the core of things, I like a plan and I like to know where we're going, and it makes me feel secure and like I'm doing something if I'm doing that. And it feels like counterintuitive sometimes to just feel like we're flying by the seat of our pants. But then I'm like, well, it's been working for this long, so we might as well just keep doing it.
And I have been worried before because, like, I understand, as you get to know somebody, it's kind of, this is my other marriage. I have figured out, okay, she needs to feel like there is a plan. She needs to know. So, like, I've figured out how to communicate what I need to do. So, like, I'll say, I'll wake up in the morning and remember what Amanda needs is to know a plan. So I'll wake up in the morning and be like, what time would you like to record on X day? Even though I don't really need to know that. I just know that she needs to know that. And then if I write it down and I follow the directions, we'll be straight. She has had to kind of, I guess, get used to my laissez-faire, and she has. And then at the same time, I think her preparedness has made me be like, okay, I got to be at least half prepared. And like, so it does work.
Well, and that's why this works, because
and I think the show would not be as good if we were, timed to down to the minute of where it is we're going to go and how we're going to do it, because we pulled some amazing things out our ass. Really.
Well, and that's why this works, because remember that from each of your birth charts, both of your moons are very different, right? Because Amanda, you have your moon in Taurus, because the moon is all about my needs, what I need to feel safe. The moon in Taurus needs plan, structure, order, organization. Melissa, you have your moon in Sagittarius, which is the moon of like, too much structure suffocates me, and if everything is planned to the hilt. So this is good because it's allowed both of you for your respective moons to work on the shit that they have to work on.
It's so funny hearing that back again, because when we met in December, we were both trying to be respectful of one another's time. And she was like, I'm not trying to encroach on your vacation. And I was like, I'm not trying to encroach on your real life. And we figured out, like, I realized we were only going to see each other for like 4 hours on one day. And I was like, wait a minute, I came all the way out here. Like, I want to see you. Like, I need to know, like, we got to figure this out and get together more. And she's like, well, I'm not trying. So that's so funny, because now all of these things that have happened over the last few years, I'm like, oh my God, that makes so much sense.
And what's crazy is when we met in December and we were both like, we both believed we were honoring each other's boundaries. We were both sitting in the space of not talking about it yet. We didn't even really have the conversation until she was already en route, where it was like, oh, should we kind of make a plan for what we're going to do, since we also have 19 children to wrangle while we do this? So it's like, it's very interesting to know that it's the podcast working the way that it's supposed to be working. And I'm also comforted by it, because so many times I've felt, I guess, like I'm impeding the growth because of my flightiness, when now I can pitch it as my flightiness is actually part of it. It's part of the magic, Amanda. Not ready today.
It's not a crutch.
That feels like yes. Yeah, it's not. See, it's fine.
Now, the other thing in the chart we're going to talk about is all these technical issues that keep coming up.
So just a little peek behind the curtain for anybody listening, or if you're watching this, you can clearly see we are trying out some new technology. And if you've listened to this or seen an Instagram live for any amount of time, you will understand that technology is never our friend. We are doing this new technology in Mercury retrograde, and now Andy is like, this is actually part of your story. Yeah. Melissa keeps freezing.
And the reason for that is that in this chart, Mercury, the planet of, among other things, technology and communication, is squared by or 90 degrees away from Neptune. And Neptune is not a bad planet, but when Neptune is 90 degrees away from something, the visual that I always tell people is it just basically casts out a bunch of fog and mist that makes things very difficult to work through. And here it's doing that to Mercury, which is the planet that rules technology. So not surprising that a chart that has a Mercury-Neptune square encounters some technological issues. That's also kind of built into the chart. And funny enough, that's the only real challenge in this entire chart, by the way.
And all this time, we thought it was just Melissa's fault that she was too old to understand how to work any of these things. Had we only known, I feel so bad. We've been blaming her every time something goes wrong technologically, that we really know that it's the stars that are against us in this place.
Yeah.
As she just got kicked off of...
Now, there is another interpretation of this, too, that I want to bring up, but I'll wait until Melissa comes back because I want her to make sure that she hears it as well to her feedback. Well, the other thing I'll say, too, is that this is also a chart that has a really nice blend of a lot of things in air signs, but also a lot in earth signs. So, oh, look who's here. Speaking
Welcome
of glitches.
I was like, this can, and you know what I said? I said, Andy stars, they got jokes. Because the literal moment that you said, now we need to talk about your technical difficulties, ladies. The little dinosaur that crossed across the screen and says no internet. That's all I had. I was like, wow. Oh my God. I am so embarrassed. But
well, one thing you missed that actually is, I think you'll love to hear, is that once you are no longer in the video here, Amanda was saying how she felt bad that all this time the thought was that all these technological glitches were your fault, but now she understands that it's part of the chart.
See how I be getting blamed for stuff around here?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so it is in the chart.
Because Mercury, which is the planet of among other things technology, is basically challenged by Neptune that just throws everything into this very vague, confusing place. So the fact that technology doesn't work so well is partially related to that. But the other way this can be interpreted too, and you have to tell me how this fits if it does, but because Mercury is also about ideas and thoughts, when Neptune squares it, it can indicate that maybe initially was there maybe a lack of clarity initially on what this is going to be about and what you were going to do, because that's Neptune Mercury. Go ahead.
You just blew our collective minds. Yes, we recorded for 6 months before we decided on what this podcast was even going to be about. Every week we sat down for an hour and recorded and had thought we were making one thing, and it wasn't that. Oh my goodness.
There we go.
And then we just kept, but again, like the chart said, we just kept showing up willy-nilly every week, not necessarily at the same time every time. We just kept showing up. And I called it getting mojo. That's what I called it. So like we could have a technical name for it, where I would be like, okay, I don't know if we're ready yet, or I don't, like, you know, it was kind of like growing chemistry in the time before we put it out. But while we were growing chemistry, we were also trying to figure out, like, what is the angle? Because I think at one point we really thought it was about motherhood, but then kind of like an anti-motherhood.
The good news is
or
that
like,
her
we're
audio will
moms,
be
where it's just
here
like,
in the back end.
Oh,
You
y'all didn't hear a word I said?
growing chemistry.
Chemistry, and then it froze.
Yeah, it was. Well, I was saying it's like we were growing chemistry to kind of figure out what the zone was, and I called it getting mojo, so it would have a name, you know, rather than like a.
Oh,
wow!
Out loud.
And I love that it's happening as we're talking about the Neptune Mercury square. But yeah, that's also another interpretation that makes sense, that when Neptune and Mercury are not jiving, that's what happens, that clarity of thought gets a little bit foggy. But just like with the birth chart of a person, these are all things that you can experience and then work through and work on. Hello again.
Neptune is laughing at us.
Do
Yes.
I exist?
Oh, I was just saying to Amanda how, that whole thing about a little bit of maybe vagueness about what it's about is very much along those lines. But I was saying too that just like with the chart of a person, it doesn't mean that just because you have Mercury Neptune square that it's something that you can't work through. It just means that it's something you have to work through, and then once you do, that's kind of considered okay. It's been addressed. It's no longer haunting you. But if you don't address it, that's the kind of thing that you just keep facing over and over. So I guess there must have been a point where that was it, like after the 6 months, where it kind of became more clear, and then you're like, okay, this is what it's about.
It was literally like what, a week before? A week or two before?
Yes, about a week before. It was like, okay, wait. And how it came to be was the name of the podcast is actually a Glassjaw lyric.
Oh.
But Imperfect Strangers is a lyric in one of the songs, but I was just like, and the whole time we knew, it was like, we don't really know each other, we're getting to know each other. And when we were talking about it being a mom podcast, we were talking about being flawed moms, because there's nobody doing that. So then I was like, okay, so then this will just be, and I think both of us had always, just in talking about motherhood, had always felt like, I don't want that to be my whole entire identity. Sure, I've had kids, but I'm also a whole person outside of my kids. And then we were kind of like, how can we build content around that? Because sometimes, you know, you don't feel like talking about your kids. Sometimes your kids are completely uninteresting to people who don't fuck with kids. So, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, I would like to make something universal, and she felt the same way, you know, so that, and I felt like we didn't want to encroach upon her existing content. So then it just became, what about it's just two strangers getting to know each other? And then we started getting down this rabbit hole of perfect strangers, imperfect strangers, Balky and Larry, etc. And that's how it came to be. So now I'm happy to know that too was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was telling Amanda, that's really the only challenge in this whole chart, because everything else is just very very copacetic, getting along. And I think it shows why, to your point from earlier, it's made it past much, much, much more than 7 episodes.
113-ish.
Damn.
Yeah. Well, that's so good to know. All right, so we'll just keep that big Capricorn energy and just keep being that slow goat to the top of the mountain.
Yes.
All right, well, before we get in...
I believe in us when it's manageable.
Andy's given me some renewed energy, because I feel like the things that we've felt lately, it felt like it's just frustrating. It's just frustrating to come in and both of you are ready to get going, and then, you know, like one of her audio files this week, like it kept coming through corrupt, and I was like, oh my gosh, like we had a whole episode and now like where's the audio? But got that fixed, got back on track. But it's really interesting to hear, you know, the things that just came up within the chart, and then to be able to directly relate those. You know, I mean, for anybody that is still on the fence, it's not like Andy's out here, you know, pulling things out of thin air. Like it all makes a lot of sense, and it's not just like woo woo.
Well, and you know, that reminds me of one of the things that I often say in readings, is that one of the many things that I love about astrology is that, sure, each astrologer may present the information in their unique way, but we're all dealing with the same source material. So what I mean by that is that when I'm doing a reading for somebody, and so for example, let's say that they tell me, oh, is there anything in the chart that talks about, you know, how chaotic my upbringing was? And I'll say what it is, and I tell them, it's not just me saying this because you told me. You can go to any astrology book and look up this aspect that you have, and you'll see that relates to a chaotic upbringing. So I love that, because it also means that you can validate anything I'm saying with the astrological information that I had to learn, you know, when I got into this. So it's not just me saying, oh, I just have a feeling that. It's like, no, you can go check. And I think that gives people some peace of mind that, okay, so it's not just something that was said because I said something, and then he's like, oh, let me conveniently also say this. So I think that's one of the great things about astrology, that it can always be validated.
I love that.
I actually, with my first reading, when he took out the thing on the Zoom and you could see the dial and all the little notches, I was like, hold on now. That's where it really clicked to me, like, oh, there's math to this. This is not just like his interpretation of my feelings and him wanting me to feel good. Because he also gets down to that underbelly part of the chart and be like, okay, we gotta get to the bad shit now. So like, it really, there's a science and a math to it, and kind of like an intuition, but that's specific to his personality. But the astrology part, the chart don't lie.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. And that's why you can take, you know, your birth chart to 5 different astrologers, and maybe, sure, like their individual personalities will shine through. Maybe one will focus more on this or more on that, but you're not going to get 5 completely different readings, because we all learn the same stuff.
Well, fantastic. As always, we want to extend a great big Imperfect Strangers hug to the lovely Andy Bellatti. Andy, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to record an episode with us and be on the show. If you're interested in learning more about Andy or learning more about astrology, you can find him on Instagram at Astrology with Andy, all one word. You can also find him on the World Wide Web at astrologywithandy.com. Over at his website, you can book a reading, or you can also enroll in his brand new course, How to Read a Birth Chart, astrologywithandy.com/services. So thank you very much to Andy. And listen, we know that on this public feed, we are not always there when you call, but over on Patreon, we are always on time. Every week, we are releasing a new Patreon bonus episode. We archive all of our Monday Night Lives, so you know if you miss a live, you miss a lot, but you'll never have to miss out if you are a patron. You can support this show by going to patreon.com/Imperfect Strangers. You'll get access to close friends, our private Discord server, and depending on your tier, a whole host of benefits. Our patrons now enjoy our episodes early and ad-free. So if you were a patron, you would already have this hot little episode in your hand a whole day before everybody else gets it. Patrons this week will also get to hear us talk with Andy after we finish the episode. He reads our year ahead predictions in our charts. So you can check that out this week on Patreon. Again, patreon.com/Imperfect Strangers podcast. Thank you, as always, for listening. We appreciate each and every one of you. We appreciate your support. Share this podcast with a friend. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss out on an episode. And we will see you next week with a brand new show. Thanks so much. Bye.